Hey, welcome to Creative Block. I am your host, V. I interview people in creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam. I asked people on Twitter if they had specific topics they wanted us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts. And today we have Brianne Drouhard. Hi. Is,
Hello.
did I pronounce her name right?
I think you did. My last name is supposed to be French, but I don't know how to pronounce it properly. And then I worked with a French character designer, and then he was
Really?
like, and then he was and then he was like, "Well, is your family from the north or south of France? Because that changes it too." And I'm like, "I have no idea. All I know is that I think that they ran away from the French Revolution and then kept running around America, United States after that."
Oh, really? Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, I think you said it right. My grandma always said it was like Drouhard, but that's obviously not everyone.
Yeah,
I just say Drouhard. It's just easier.
that makes sense. I was like, oh, great. I'm so happy. I
Yeah,
feel like if
no,
I
it's
said it
fine.
with the like French, I would say Drua, but I was like, yeah, that would be more
Yeah,
like North, I guess.
yeah, that was how he said it, and then the other one was like a lot more nasally, and I was like, I can't even pronounce it. So,
That's so funny.
yeah, it
Um,
was, yeah.
but Brienne, you have such a long career. I'm so excited to have you on because you've done so many things like character designing, storyboards, directing. You've ran your own show, Amethyst for DC at WB. And you have your own webcomic, RPG, that you've been doing for how many years now?
Oh gosh, I think it's gonna be nine. January 6th
Oh
will be 9 years
wow,
old.
9 years
Because I,
old.
yeah, because I think it technically it launched in 2014. It does not feel like it's been that long,
Oh
but
yeah. Yeah,
but
because
it
I
has. Because I've been getting a lot of comments lately from readers who started reading it in grade school and high school and have already graduated college.
that's crazy. Oh my
I
God.
mean, it's really cool. Like I mean, it doesn't actually make me feel old. It's just kind of like, oh wow, that's time flies when you're having fun, I guess.
Real, yeah, for real. I think this is going to be something that's like really fun to talk about because I also have a web comic and it's like it's really I love talking about web comics. But before we
Oh
get
yeah.
to that, I kind of want to ask you a little bit about how did you get into animation? Like what was your path like from realizing you wanted to get into it to actually kind of pursuing an education in animation?
Um, yeah, okay. So I'm one of those people that realized really early on that I loved animation. Like my I kind of grew up like out in the boonies. Like very rural farming area. Like my dad farms
And where was
and
that? What state?
Washington State, but
Oh,
the east
cool.
side. So
Mhm.
like anybody who's like, like it's Othello, but it's like, 40 minutes from Moses Lake, like 40 minutes from like Tri-Cities, 2 hours south of Spokane, like very landlocked. I mean, we have like rivers and stuff, but it's just, there's not a lot out there. I mean, there's more than there used to be, but we had a neighbor, like an older couple that lived down the road from us that, like, this is what I remember. I had to be about three, and I think they brought like a Betamax by,
Oh
and
yeah.
they had Disney's Alice in Wonderland, and that's my first animation memory. And I remember loving that movie and how beautiful it was and how cute it was, and didn't really understand. I mean, I just knew I liked it, and also, I've been like asthmatic since from birth. Like it's just
Mm.
hereditary. Like my dad has it, so I often like I couldn't run around a lot, or they would have to find ways to make me not run around and have an asthma attack and be you know
Mm.
very hyperactive child. So when we would go to like restaurants or whatever, they would put the table mat in front of me and like a pen and be or a crayon and be like, just sit down and do this for a while. So I just it was basically I was supported to draw, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then I think when I was around 5, we moved and we got cable and we got the Disney Channel, and cable was still fairly new back then. Like I think at that point that channel was only like, I think I'm as old as that channel. Like that's a crazy thing. Like I'm that weird in between, like older millennial in between, like analog to digital. So like, yeah, that weird
Oh,
generation. So anyway, we had Disney Channel and they had Wonderful World of Color, and they had like, Walt Disney like introducing the animated like characters dancing on his desk and stuff, but then they would like interview the animators and they give a tour, and I'm like, "Oh, that's how it's made." So
oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, so I knew the cartoon characters weren't real, but it was like, "Oh, I love this." And I just that just sealed it. I was obsessed. Although I think I wasn't until I was like 8 that I realized that Disney wasn't alive anymore, because like one of my goals was like, oh, I want to meet him someday.
Oh.
He was like long time dead at that point. Uh, but yeah, like I'm in where I'm like in a unique situation where my family was very supportive of me doing what
Mm.
I want to do. Like they were kind of like, oh, like as long as you're not a farmer or a doctor. Like my mom's a nurse, but they're like, as long as you're not a farmer or a doctor, because they have awful hours.
Oh yeah.
And the thing that's funny is that, I mean, the last 5 or 6 years, I try not to do all nighters or work late anymore.
Hmm.
Like, but there was times when I was in college or other classes that sometimes I just chat on my dad on the phone at 1 or 2 in the morning during harvest because he's up all night harvesting.
Oh
So
yeah.
so it was
Wow.
like it's kind of funny. Like my hours were very close to farming hours for a while, and like lately I'm just like, it's fine. I don't need to be working this hard all the time. But yeah. So and then when I was starting high school, my art teacher, which the sad thing is I heard that my high school doesn't even have art classes anymore, so that's great. But
Oh,
my art
because they
teacher at the
used to have
time,
them, but then they like didn't have them. Yeah. Yeah,
like,
yeah.
they're gonna funnel all that money into sports. Nothing against sports, but that's what
Hmm.
happens in a small town in the middle of nowhere. But my art teacher at the time, I guess, went to like a teachers convention over on the coast, like in Seattle or somewhere over there, and ran into a teacher who taught at CISA, which later changed to InterSpark and is now CISA, which is California State Summer School for the Arts. And they have different departments for that summer school. So there's film and TV, there's acting, there's writing, theater,
Hmm.
and animation. And they were like, oh, they will take like up to like I think a certain amount of out of state students, and then they'll pay for part of it. But like out of state students, like you have to like get the money to do it and stuff. So
Hmm.
I applied, got into it, and so I went in 96 and 97. I went 2 years in a row, and
Oh wow.
yeah.
What grades were you in when you went?
What? Sorry.
Grades, like were you like a sophomore, like a junior?
Oh, soph yeah, sophomore and junior. I was a soph yeah, my sophomore year was my first year I went. And uh sorry, my brain farted for a second. So I went, and I think the year before they were using the Cal Arts. I think like the year I went was like the second or third year they used the Cal Arts campus. Like I
Hmm.
guess it used to be up in one of the Sacramento campuses at one point. So we were using the Cal Arts facility, and we were staying in the Cal Arts dorms for like I think it was like July to August. I can't remember exactly what the months were. So that was like my first time in my life I met other people my age that were into the same thing I was, because this is still like internet was still very, very new. There wasn't really any,
Oh
you know,
yeah, like
there
arts
wasn't
community online or
yeah,
yeah,
there
yeah.
wasn't a DeviantArt yet. I don't There was probably forums, but like my family didn't have internet yet, like because
Hmm.
you're out in the boonies, there's no way to get internet. There's no like
Yeah,
cable set up
yeah,
for that.
yeah.
So it was like, a few years before all that stuff started to blow up. So it was like my first time meeting other people that were into animation, and I had a great time. They had us all make our own film. They had guest speakers come in. My teachers, like there was like 4 or 5 teachers that like taught everybody, and they were all great. But it was Christine Panushka, who I think she was she was teaching experimental animation at Cal Arts, and then I think she went to USC after that. And there was Christine Panushka, Ruth Hayes, Corny Cole, and Gary. Oh my gosh, I forgot his last name. Also another a lot of experimental animators. And then there was like Corny,
Mhm.
who actually had more of a character animation background. Like he actually studied under Chuck Jones and like
Oh wow,
work,
yeah.
yeah, and he's it's funny too because he was a mentor to some people that were I consider mentors like in the industry now.
Oh, very
So
cool.
yeah, like he's a very sweet man, but I learned a lot just from observing just how he draws and everything. So but yeah, CISO was amazing because it was like, oh, I found my people sort of. And I applied the second year, got in again. And then I remember Christine pulling me aside and asking me like, so what are your goals for the future? And I was like, I want to apply for experimental animation. Like I want to be like in your department, you know, because she taught experimental
Mm,
Cal Arts. And she was kind of honest with me and she's like, you can totally do that, but she's like, I kind of want you to go into character because, you know, it'll be a little bit, I think, you know, you have a more like I tell stories, like I have a more
right.
traditional story structure.
Mm-hmm.
So um she recommended that I try to apply for character animation. So my junior year in high school, my we have a senior project at our high school to graduate. And we had two things in our at my high school that we had to do to graduate. One was we had to have a senior project and finish it at the end of the year, and that could be anything. Like it's, you know, you could do, you know, interview somebody in town or, be a 4-H or something, you know. So
Mhm.
like, you know, raising a hog or something. And then the other thing was is we had just gotten a McDonald's for the first time. We had to fill out a job application for McDonald's or you would not graduate
Really? That's
because that
crazy.
yeah, it was they didn't really think highly of like us, you know, having a future. So
Oh,
um
interesting.
yeah, and then my senior year I had enough credits, so I took, you know, my I took I took art again in my senior year because my art teacher was very supportive and like he held me at a higher standard. I did not get an easy A. Like he made me do extra stuff. He actually made me make a comic.
Oh, very cool. How was
Yeah,
that? Did you have fun?
I did, but it was like also like, you know, my brain was like, I don't understand. And also like
Yeah.
there's not really any comic book stores where I was at. Like I didn't really have a full exposure to comics. So
Oh,
um
interesting.
yeah, but my senior year project was I was going to make an animated film. So I my parents got me a I still have it. I don't use it that much, but they got me a camcorder that could record the shortest it could record is 8 frames at a time.
Oh,
And
interesting.
you had to use a little remote for it. So I had a camera stand. So I made I made a film that I should probably I think it was on my Blogger, but I think Blogger like, you know, ate it because it, you know, doesn't really work anymore.
Hmm.
But I did that film and that was one of the things I turned in for my Cal Arts application and I got into Cal Arts
Oh,
and
cool.
then our principal actually called me into his office to tell me that that was not a career that I needed to like. Yeah,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
whole 9 yards. I can't remember if my parents had to come in or whatever, and I was just like, okay, dude, I don't know what to, whatever. So
Ah, that's crazy.
yeah, so like, yeah, my parents are like supportive, but like I think that's the only like really roadblocks I've kind of had.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, in terms of pursuing it, at least, in terms of like pursuing
yeah,
this career. Yeah, yeah.
so I was part of like a small group that went to Cal in my class that went to Cal Arts straight out of high school. Most of the teachers were really supportive. There was one teacher that was like, "I don't want to teach you. You have no world experience. You don't belong here. You don't deserve to be here."
Wait,
Um,
who's like at Cal Arts? Somebody said that?
yeah, it was our color designer. He came
What?
around. He liked me by my senior year. Like
Okay.
I think
Wow.
because like I was still doing my assignments and stuff, and I finished all my films. So eventually he had to like me. So
Uh-huh.
I like older now looking back at it, like, yeah, I get it. He's right. Like, where are our stories going to come from? How much world experience do we have? Like what,
Right.
it's there's nothing wrong with having some harsh truth thrown at you, I guess. But
But it's also
I will
like
say,
you just had like a different world experience. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. Like
yeah,
even if you
yeah,
grew up in like the boonies, like you said, like it's like that's still a life, that it doesn't, it I don't know, and your dad was like a farmer. I think this is stuff that people don't talk about. And it's like it's valid and interesting. I don't know. Just my two
yeah.
cents.
Yeah, so I guess that's like the flip side of like, people like worry like, oh, am I too old to start or whatever? And it's like you're never too old. Like you still have like some worth. Like you got that world experience at least. Like that's something.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but I overall enjoyed my time at Cal Arts, but I will say it was like a completely different experience than I expected. Like CISA, I was like, I found my people, and like it was very like not competitive. It was just more we were just all happy to be there and like showing our
Right.
like our own Darkwing Duck memes with each other, like before we even knew what memes were. We had our own little special language. And then started Cal Arts, and like I have lifelong friends I made there, but I remember like my first week in um realizing that like, oh, everyone's very competitive. Like I just came here to learn and make stuff, and and I will say though, like with time, as time has gone on, like the competitive stuff like really didn't matter. Like I didn't need to worry about it, and like I really did try to just focus like on myself and just bettering myself while I was there and not trying to worry about what other people were doing. And I
Hmm.
think that's like the best advice I can give if you do go to, you know, any sort of early animation school, or even if you're starting at your first job and you feel that way, like do not try not to
Yeah.
give into that.
I
Also
agree
just
for like mental health reasons. It's like it's better to just like focus on like just bettering yourself rather than like comparing yourself to others. It's
yeah,
yeah.
totally. You will make yourself sick. And like also just as a note for anyone that's listening that like I I feel like I got what I needed out of going to Cal Arts, and I enjoyed my time there, but I can honestly say you do not need to go to that school to have a career in animation or any sort of art form. Like there's more than one path. I have close friends that are amazing that applied the year I did and didn't get in, that have really healthy careers, and they still have regrets or doubts. And I'm like, please do not. Like we still like met each other. We still get to work together. Like
That's so true. And I feel also like for anyone that's listening to this episode and who's wondering about like other career path, like there's been or like a college path, there's like some really interesting episodes on the podcast, like for example, Kofi, Fiagome, and we've
mm-hmm.
had Ferosha, who's also not gone through like the traditional path. They're like more self-taught. Stephanie Riso, she's gone to like a um community college, so definitely like yeah, I think this is great advice to say like even though Cal Arts is like a staple name, it's not definitely not the only path.
Yeah, and like I've had a lot of coworkers who worked, didn't go to college and just, were able to still, like those are like some of the people I've learned the most from too. Like since everyone has different types of experience, like they've all learned to draw different ways, and like everyone kind of learns their their own little like cheats and hacks on how to like, get stuff done. So anyway,
Yeah.
sorry that was a very long drawn out thing,
No, that's
but
great because we went through like a lot of it. And I think that's like it's really interesting that you mentioned like not having internet because that's something that I feel is like a thread throughout the podcast is like finding your
mm-hmm.
community, art community is really important. And I feel like for you found it through like summer school, like the art summer school. Just to kind of like keep being excited and wanting to just kind of pursuing that path. Um
Yeah.
how for you once so you went to Cal Arts, how did you find like land your first job? How like what was the timeline between Cal Arts and your first job? What was it and how kind of did you apply? What was the process for that?
Okay. So, um, yeah, this is probably going to be a little bit winded too.
That's
So my
fine.
technically, yeah, my first animated related job. I had an internship for the summer at July Films between my junior and senior year at CalArts because one of my animation teachers, Mike Wing, was doing his own indie film called My Little My Little World, which I I know a lot of I think the animation's mostly done on it, but I don't know if it'll ever be out. I have no idea what's going on with it. I know that like I think at one point it was 80% colored and stuff. But he was my teacher. He really liked my junior film. I interned over the summer. It was my first time like outside of CISA, it was like my first summer being away from home. And the thing was is that I it was a really tough time because most of my friends went back home for the summer. Most people were out of state. So I was here in California and there wasn't really anyone around. And I remember that summer just being really difficult. And my drawing sucked. And I was like, that was the first time I realized that like how much my happiness affects how I draw.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I don't think any of the animation I did for that film was good. I think they had to redo it all. I was also probably like 19. No, I turned I turned 21 that summer. Sorry.
Hmm.
So my senior year, yeah. So anyway, my senior year, that was the year when feature bottomed out at all the studios. All our teachers were coming in, they were going through divorces, they were losing, some of them had to like were losing, their homes, had to downsize. They couldn't find work. We had one teacher, I remember him coming in, who actually has a healthy career in TV now. But I remember
Mm.
him coming in and telling us like, my advice to you guys is to switch careers. I'm so sorry. You wasted your time. There is nothing out there for you. Um,
Whoa, I can't believe they would say that. That's
yeah, and then
crazy.
and some of the other teachers said similar. I do
Sounds kind of
remember.
like what's going on right now.
Well, I mean, I don't want to say it'll get better or it'll get worse. It's
I guess.
honestly for me, it's not comparable. We
Oh,
still have
okay.
work. I'm
Yeah.
talking like I think there was only like maybe two or three shows being done at Cartoon Network at the time. At the time, CalArts had no. I think we had one teacher teaching TV design. That was it. Everything was feature based. There was
Mm.
like, how do you get into TV when you don't even know who to apply to? And like, I think Warner Animation at the time probably only had two or three shows they were working on. Like, I'm trying to remember how many, there, I don't think there was that much going on. And then, anyway, yeah, that was going on during my senior year. I still went ahead and tried to finish my senior film. I was definitely having senioritis. Um, but I finished it and I finished my portfolio. And because CalArts has a job fair, then the way it would work was that we would all at the main gallery, like there's like these table, like long tables spread out. You put your portfolio down open with your name and your contact information. And then you go and leave, and then all the recruiters go through all the portfolios, and then there's a callback list up on the bulletin board
Mm.
for all the different studios. And this had gone on for years. Like I don't think I ever had like a substantial real callback. And so I was one of the like five people from my graduating class of 70 people that had a job after college. And I was one of like three or four people that basically ended up at this one third party video game company out in Moore Park called Paradox. And they were
Mm.
working on backyard wrestling too.
That's
And
that's really cool
yeah,
though. That like you went to like so you started in video games. I didn't know that.
yeah, sort of. And I was like, you know, this is so really dumb. Like, oh, I was like a gamer. Like, we had a Super Nintendo and I played lots of video games because there's like nothing else to do out in the boonies except so I used to play lots of video games. It was just me and my brother playing games. I mean, we did other things, but like overall, that was like my hobby, I guess.
Hmm.
And like yeah, like that job fair thing was kind of that. So everybody was like already like kind of like really down. And I remember Corny, like my exit review for graduating, it was Corny Cole, Bruce Richards, and Frank Terry, and I'm gonna say his name, but Leo Hobaika. He was the one who originally told me, "Oh, you shouldn't be here. You don't have life experience." But he was
Ah.
very sweet at the end. He accidentally broke I made a maquette for my junior student film of the monkey girl, and he picked it up, thought it was a toy, and broke the arm off of it.
No.
He felt awful, and I remember Corey looking at him like, what, what you, yeah. Anyway, I remember Corny and Bruce, Corny specifically telling me that I would have probably have a really hard time finding work for a while, just because in general with what was going on in the industry. But he also told me that like he's like, your art has a really strong voice, and he's like, he's like, I'm glad you leaned into that, like that's what you should do, but like this industry, like, you know sometimes that's, you need to be able to like, you know be, I mean, I can be a chameleon, I really can, but
Mm.
he just told me that like, um in general, because I have such a unique style, he's like, it might take you a while, but he's like, I think that's honestly the best path for you, because he's like, like you do have like a strong sensibility or whatever. And it was
Hmm.
really, I mean, I took those words to heart. Like anytime I felt down, I was like, well, he told me it would be like this, and that's good. Like I'm prepared at least. But
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I was one of like a handful of my classmates that had a job out of college. Like I don't remember everybody, but like there was a lot of talented people in our class that like aren't working in animation today. Like a lot of them have moved on to be illustrators or doing something completely different, and still in touch
Hmm.
with them once in a while. But like there's a whole class of Cal Arts students that are not working in animation because the industry was like so bad in 2002. Um
Wow. Yeah, that's really
yeah,
interesting to
there's very few from my class that are working. I mean, it's still, I mean, the good thing is a lot of us are still working and like, you know, have done a lot of cool things. So like, yeah, so it was me, Beth Slevin, and Abby Goldsmith, and I think one other guy who isn't working in animation anymore. We all went to Paradox. I know Travis Hathaway and Chris Chua went to Pixar. And I probably there was a few other people that like I am definitely forgetting. I think Josie Trinidad ended up at Disney Feature finally, but I think she had a hard time too.
hmm
Um, and I think, and then yeah, so I went to the video game place, and before I took the job, I was like, I don't know how to animate 3D, and like, oh, we'll teach you. I'm like, okay. So went there. They had us using bootleg copies of 3D Studio Max, and they had it made like this thick book. And they're like, yeah, just do the first. Here's your assignment, and here's the first lesson. Just do it.
Oh, wow.
So I was trying to do a move set for one of the characters, like, because you have to like the other thing too, like animating move sets at that company. And I don't know if this is normal for other video game studios since then. Like it's been 20 years. But like you like, okay, you have to do the move set for like the punch. You have to do the like punch with the left hand, punch with the right hand, like kick. You have to make sure that it looks good in every angle, you know.
Right.
And the computer that they had there couldn't do playback. You had to export a movie to be able to actually even see it, and the computer couldn't even play the movie playback properly. So
No, because yeah,
yeah,
computers were so slow.
I ended up bringing my Gateway laptop in because it worked better, and then I was told not to do that because it was embarrassing to them.
Oh
So
no.
yeah, so I was like, okay, I'll just use this. But I remember the first day, I I couldn't. I kept having like the IK problem where like you want the arm to move a little bit down or whatever, but the
Yeah.
computer interprets it as having the arm do a full 360 to get to the other pose. So it's like
Yeah.
breaking
Yeah.
the model,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
couldn't get it to work. I was spending hours, and then finally my friend Abby came over because she'd already been working at the studio for a couple months, and I'm like, I can't get this to work. And she looked at the book and she's like, the book is wrong.
Oh.
And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, this is actually wrong. And then she printed out this thing she found online. She's like, here's the correct thing. And I was like, oh my God, bless you. Like, so so I was there for a few months, and like they had us working weekends for free. We were only getting $500 for every 2 weeks. It was like non-union. I was green, didn't know what I was doing. And our animation director came in one day when we had like a huge crunch and was like, "You guys have to work this weekend, or I'll make sure you're blacklisted if you try to apply anywhere else, because I know people who work in the industry or something."
Oh my
And
God.
my one of my other classmates stood up to him because I was just like, "Oh, I was like awful. I was like, I'll do it because I want us to, get it in on time, of course." And
Right.
my classmate stood up to the guy and was like, "Oh, really? You know people? We know people in the industry too, and I'll tell them all about you."
Oh
And I was
yeah.
like, oh, that's right. So anyway, I worked at that studio for like 9 months. I, worked with some nice people. I learned 3D animation, and they got bought out by a bigger video game studio that also no longer exists. And I guess they had been embezzling.
Oh.
So they
Ah.
took everybody out to lunch. Like, oh, we're taking it to lunch, and they changed all the locks so everyone was out. So
What? That's so
yeah,
crazy. Oh my God.
yeah, there's a movie called I think it's Grandma's Boy. I can't remember. I mean, it's not a good movie, but it involves a guy who works at a really weird video game company, and honestly, that is the closest thing to what that job was like. It was I have the most wild stories. Like my friends know about it, but
That's
like
so
just
crazy.
yeah, it was a circus. It would be like such a good sitcom. So um yeah, the last couple of months I was working at that studio, I was like, this isn't gonna last. I need to figure out what to do. So I ended up learning like basic HTML and built my own website, my own portfolio website, because I was like, I don't know what to do. I need to learn something. This is not
How
what I
would
wanted to go in animation for.
how common was it to have a an online portfolio at the time?
I don't think it was very common. The only other person I knew who on that was an animation person who had a website was if she's listening to this, I'm probably going to embarrass her, but I want her to know that like a bunch of us looked up to her. So when I
Mhm.
was at Cal Arts, somebody was like, "Oh, have you seen Amy Major's website?" And we're like, "What?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, she's an animation person. She has a website." And she actually was like she was one of our upperclassmen at the time.
Mm.
And she had a website with a forum. She had her art on there and stuff. And I was like, "Wow, that's really cool." And I think there was like a few other people who had websites, but I was just like, I think also I was like making printing out portfolios is so expensive. Buying the portfolio, driving the gas to drop it off at studios, and
Right.
you and then even sometimes rarely they'd be like, come pick your portfolio up. So you're driving back out again to pick up your portfolio,
Yeah.
you know. So I was like, I wish studios would use websites, but I'm gonna go ahead and make one. So hopefully that will help in the future. Also, like I'm going crazy. I need something else to do.
Right.
Because that's the other thing too. When I worked at that game company, since I was one of the very few people from my class who had a job, everyone else moved back home to their home state or
Mhm.
hometown, which was in LA. So that was also a really lonely year, especially after they laid our studio off. There was like a good chunk of time where I didn't really have anyone to talk to. And
Oh, right. Yeah. And like you were saying,
yeah,
like internet wasn't like super big yet. Or was it kind of
yeah.
starting to pick up at all?
I mean, I was online a lot still. Like I would like lurk on B3TA. I'm trying to remember what forums I was on. And like one of my classmates, he made a forum called Motion Zoo, which is long gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And we would Photoshop our heads on other people's bodies. Like it was just stupid stuff all the time. Or like weird links to like weird animation that they would find online. Like that was like when Flash was still pretty young. So like people would make their own like weird Flash stuff and share it. It was just like we were just trolling each other all day.
Hmm.
Um, and I kind of forgot about this. Sorry if I feel like I'm talking too much. Sorry.
No, no, it's really fun. It's really interesting to kind of hear what the landscape was like at the time. And so, yeah, so you were by yourself and you were trying to like make your portfolio and learning HTML. And did that help you get noticed in a way? Like
It
what
it it did, but it took some time. And like so I was looking for work, and
and how did you sustain yourself while you were looking for work?
yeah, so that's the thing. So at this like I'm really fortunate that my parents helped me pay through school. Like I am very aware, like that's their thing too. Like I don't I really did my best to not waste my time at CalArts. Like I worked really hard because like I
Hmm.
did not, want their sacrifices to go to waste.
Yeah, yeah,
Also
yeah.
I had friends who wanted to go to school and did get in and couldn't afford it. Like
Hmm.
I'm not gonna go fuck around. Sorry, but I'm not gonna go there and mess around like when I know there are people who didn't get the same chance. Like, yeah.
Right. Yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
gonna and so yeah, I was laid off at the game company. I was building a website, And my mom, she works as an RN, or she just, she recently retired, which good for her, like working for 40 plus years, amazing. But the hospital she was working at, they had some pamphlets from a place called Regional Maple Leaf that was like about about like a teenage health book. Like these are the changes you're going to go through,
Mm-hmm.
like they had different types of little things, and she was reading one of them. In the back, apparently they give out a grant to they like people can apply for a grant to illustrate the next year's teenage health book.
Oh, very
And
cool.
yeah, and they were based up in Canada, but it was open to people in the northern US states too.
Oh, very
So
cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
so she sent me the info. I went ahead and did a little bit of art and applied, and I got it. And I can't remember how much the grant was. It was substantial.
Oh, wow.
And I was enough for me to finally buy my first desktop computer, and I basically bought a gaming setup because I wanted to keep making films after school.
Oh,
Like
right. Yeah, yeah.
my goal from graduating CalArts was not to be a showrunner. I was originally, all I wanted to be was an animator, and then I think by
Mm,
my junior year I was like, maybe I need to get into kids illustration. Like I was already thinking
mm-hmm.
like I need to be flexible. I don't know what to apply for. I just know I need to be flexible. So I
Right.
was like, well, I'll make my own films or whatever, like that's my goal. So I was able to buy that computer, finish making my website, and then I got contacted by uh, the creator of Shaolin Showdown. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
this is going into a random spot that I don't bring up very much, and I can't talk too much about it because reasons. But she found me through the CalArts alumni site. Like I don't even know if my CalArts alumni email works. I think at the time that we didn't have email addresses for CalArts, I think it was that I had an old Yahoo account that we had on the alumni registry. And my I'm not going to say what my email was because for reasons, of course. But my email name was very similar to a project that she was developing at the time. And that's why she contacted me. So she was looking for an artist, and she was paying me like a little bit at a time, but I had to drive out to Santa Monica to do art for her on this project. And um like it wasn't yeah. So anyway, I was doing art for that for like that was during my I think that was around 2003. So I was doing art for her, but she wasn't paying me enough for me to make a living. And at one point she had me stop by Warner Brothers Television Animation to meet with one of the higher up producers there or line producers. I don't know. It was somebody on the production end. I don't remember who it was. It's somebody who's not there anymore. And she
Mm,
thumbed through my portfolio and she's like, there's nothing here we can hire you for. Like you don't fit for anything. And I was like, well, okay. Well, she didn't really she wasn't like mean, but she didn't really
yeah,
know
it's
what to
like,
tell me.
yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, and so I did a little bit more work for the Shaolin lady, and then she just wasn't paying me enough for what I was doing. And
Mm,
I ended up being like, I can't work for you anymore. And I was able to get a couple of tests. Oh, I know what it was. Sorry, it just totally phased me. So my bank account was dwindling. I was like, okay, at this point, I'm gonna have to move home and apply for video game companies in the
right.
Seattle and Renton area. Like I knew Nintendo was up there at least. Like just figuring out what to do
Mm-hmm.
because. But at this point, my parents are paying for my brother to go through college. Like I'm not going to be asking them for rent or anything. So my bank account was dwindling. I ended up taking a few design tests. I think I took one for Billy and Mandy and Teenage Robot and I probably Family Guy and then one of the prime times. I don't remember which one. And then
For
Teen
boards or
Titans
design or like all of four?
design.
Oh,
Oh, just
nice.
design. When I was in college, one of my board teachers told me I would never be a board artist.
Really?
Yeah, he still works and I'm friends with him, but I don't think he remembers telling me that. But I remember like being like gutted. Like he's like, you'll never be a board artist. I was like, well, it's fine. It's like I like design anyway, I guess. So also like this kind of ties into like when that one teacher was like, "Oh, you have no life experience." I
Mm,
was I was 19 when I started at Cal Arts, so I went through college in my early 20s. Your brain is not fully formed then.
yes, true.
Um, and I don't think I had I think, and there's so much, you're learning so much so fast by doing your own films, and you're learning from teachers and fellow students. And I don't think I think my brain needed time to digest on how to board. Like looking back at it, I think it was a long path for me.
Oh, that makes sense. Boarding is really hard. I feel
It
like
is.
especially because you
It's
said that
math.
you didn't really have like a lot of comics available and stuff when you were like growing up.
Yeah.
I feel like
Like
for
I played,
me, yeah, like I remember growing up reading a lot of manga, and I feel like I learned most of my boarding like reading manga, which
oh
was a little
yeah.
problematic too because um
Hmm.
you don't do comics the same way you do boards, but it does help if you're used to seeing like
Yeah.
this. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's like comics and boards are both fruit, but they're apples and bananas, sort of. Like
yes,
they have a
exactly.
lot of similarities, but they don't necessarily work in recipes the same way, I guess, is how to say. I don't
Yes,
know. I'm going on a weird.
exactly. No, 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 for real. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. So
yeah,
you
so
were
I
like
took
applying for design. Yeah.
yeah, so I went ahead to take the Titans test, and this is the thing that was funny. So I my roommates at the time were former classmates of mine, and apparently they were aware of the Teen Titans test. Like apparently a bunch of my classmates had taken it like months earlier, and nobody had told me about it. And they were like, "Oh yeah, nobody can get this design job because it's like so hard." And oh, and then okay, sorry to backtrack a little bit. The reason I got the test in the first place was so back I mentioned the forum called Motion Zoo that one of my classmates had started where we just basically shit post all day. And
Yeah,
we
yeah,
had
yeah.
a job board, and the job board was also for shit posting. And sorry for saying that, but that is exactly what it was. Making fake posts. And sometimes we'd have bots that would come in and we would like pretend to interact with the bot because we thought it was funny. Anyway, Matt Youngberg, who had been boarding on Titans at the time, and he would actually be a great person to interview in the future. I don't want to tell like his story, but he was boarding on Teen Titans. He posted in the job forum that they needed a designer, that they'd been having trouble finding a designer that understands what anime is.
Ha!
Because even though
Ha!
Titans is not technically anime, it's still,
Like
is
anime coded.
influenced.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And the thing was, and this is also kind of sad and weird, but this is still when animation was, a lot of feature people were still looking for work. A lot of feature people were unemployed. They were only getting applicants that had worked at Disney Feature who could not draw in that style. Like the stuff they're turning in is obviously beautiful, but you know,
I think this is
Tarzan
really
is not
interesting.
Titans.
This is really interesting because I feel like at the time, were you at CalArts at a time where it was like, don't draw anime, anime is
Oh,
bad, da 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 da.
no. So that's the other thing that's hilarious. I have only had one person in my entire life that told me not to draw big eyes and draw anime, and that was one of my CISA teachers who was
Interesting. So it's
yeah.
not something that you heard a lot. Interesting.
And it wasn't even corny. Corny did Viz Dev for Little Nemo for the TMS Little Nemo they did. Like
Mm.
he's worked for a lot of Japanese studios. So like it was never an issue. Like uh our teacher Jeff Ranjo would bring in like he was trolling us probably, but he brought in Ninja Scroll as an example. Like you know, like we had Mark Andrews, he brought in all the Ghibli stuff. Like they what Steve Anderson like I'm they all like they showed us an equal part of it. Like it wasn't just anime they would show us, it was just all our teachers loved that stuff too. So I never ever, you know, got that talk.
Interesting. Wow, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. That's really cool. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
and even I think my teacher in high school, I don't think he quite understood it, but he never told me no. As long as I was doing figure drawing and as long as I was taking his oil painting class and learning how
Okay.
to do values, like he didn't care. I mean, he cared, but I was very fortunate to have the adults in my life growing up that never were like, don't do that weird stuff. Like,
Oh, nice. That's really great.
yeah,
How
so
do
I
you
guess I'm like
think
a
like Yeah, I was gonna say, like, how do you think you had that for that job, for like that design job? How did you have that influence? Was it because were you watching anime as a kid, or like
I guess
were
technically because so I think about the time when I was maybe late grade school, junior high was when all the TMS animated series were coming out. Like they were animating episodes of Tiny Toons. Like I watched a lot of Fox Kids. Like I was like very much into that block. So it was like
mm,
the BTAS Batman animated, the Bruce Timm Batman, and like
hmm.
Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, like SWAT Cats had some episodes that were like done really well. Disney Channel used to air anime all the time. Like that's where I originally saw Unico Island of Magic, which actually honestly all that
Really?
stuff really holds up. Yeah, they used to air. I had a recording from that.
What?
Um
That's
yeah.
crazy.
And I remember just like liking how stuff was timed and how the like it's like animation's a language. There's different ways to do timing. There's different ways to draw something. Like things feel different. Like the weight feels differently if things are like on sixes versus threes, two, whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so and then going to Cal Arts and finding out that some of my teachers knew some of the animators who worked on those things, it was like, oh yeah, we're even though that was like pre-internet, we are still a small community in the world. Like it
What? That's
I was lucky to,
crazy.
yeah, I was lucky to not work for anybody who was like, you know, I everyone
Like,
everyone that I that was like adult on the animation side was had friends in other countries that were animating. So it wasn't an issue, I guess.
that's really cool. And so
Yeah.
how do you feel like you applied for that design job and got yourself to stand out from the other applicants for the
So
Teen Titans?
yeah. So Matt posted the job listing and then it was probably around I think I had just gone home for Christmas. So I had that website in my
Yes,
building.
the
Yeah.
website.
So I sent him the website, was like, I'm not going to be back in LA for like another 2 weeks. I can drop my portfolio off then. But hey, here's my website. I know that they usually want to see a physical portfolio, but hopefully, whatever, hopefully somebody over there understands. And
Hmm.
what I gathered after I got the job was that they showed the website to Glenn Murakami, and he's like, well, she understands what we're going for. They gave me the
Oh,
test. The
cool.
test was to do a turnaround of Jinx, who is honestly, she's kind of a complicated design. It was my first. I done turnarounds for school, but we always animated our turnarounds. Like that's how they taught us at College for Feature. Like you animate them.
Hmm.
So I did that, and then lined it all up, and then dropped it off, and was like, I had also was waiting back to hear back for a test I turned in for a Teenage Robot,
Oh, right.
and at that point I had $400 left in my bank account, so I was trying to figure out like I guess I got to move home. Like I need to start figuring out if I need to pack up or whatever. So got turned in a test, and I think within that week I got a call back for Teenage Robot to tell me that they were going with somebody else, but they really love my test, so they can bring me on as a cleanup artist, but I'll get to do designs. And at the time I wasn't aware of like how the animation union worked or anything, but my brain kind of saw it as like, wait, you want to pay me less than my mutual to do the same amount of work? And
Mm.
they're like, yeah, we're really sorry, but our budget only accepts one designer. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll take it, because it's work. Work is work, and
Right.
it's breaking in. But I remember just being like, man, that sucks. Okay. And so I think a couple of days later, I got a call saying, like, we want you for Titans. When can you start? Can you start this Monday? And the thing was, is Teenage Robot, the work wasn't going to start for another 2 months.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
So yeah, I was like, well, obviously I'm gonna take Titans. And then somebody was like telling me like, oh, I heard that crew's really mean and all this stuff, and they don't like women. And I was like, really? Okay, well, I guess I'll go find out. And went there, and then ended up finding out overall that team was actually really sweet. I, I felt like I was always like maybe I'm being like a nuisance, but they always like they included me in lunches. Like I got to sit in on like episode breakdowns. Like when they're breaking story, I like there was like times where like I'd be in a meeting and I'd mention something and it would end up in an episode. Like,
Oh, super cool.
yeah. And overall, like I'm still pretty close to a lot of those people. And and we worked on other shows since then and off, and I learned a lot on that show. Like I probably learned more working on that show than I learned from CalArts. Like CalArts was definitely like my springboard and foundation. And I
Right.
remember the first day they gave me a turnaround to do on Titans, and so I was sitting in my cube. I brought in my animation disc. Like I still have it, but I have an old plastic plexi desk. Not even a fancy one, just the plexi desk. The plexi disc. Sorry, plexi disc with a pegboard on it, and I just animate on my lap. That's how I usually animate or used to. But brought it in, was working on there, was like doing. I think I was doing a turnaround for like I don't remember. I think it might have been for Beast Boy's like weird Beast design. So I
Mm-hmm.
was doing the turnaround for that, and I remember Derek Wyatt and John Suzuki, who were the other two designers, walk in. They're like, "What are you doing, you nerd?" And I'm like, "What?" And then Glenn's like, "Brianne, come in my office." And I'm like, "What did I do?" And he's like, "Nothing." And he's like, "We don't have to animate." So he showed us. He showed like, and this is like how I think most turnarounds are done for TV. But he just
Mm-hmm.
showed me like, oh, you do your 3/4 front, you flip it, that's your 3/4 back, you adjust it that way. I was like, oh, see, like this is something that CalArts did, and then
Yeah.
also like I had my animation teacher my freshman year did sit us down and show us how he did cleanup for. He was actually cleaning up a scene for El Dorado, and
Oh,
he was
yeah.
showing us, and it was like funny. Anyway, side story, like he was cleaning up like a background character carrying like a pot on her head, and he was doing a drawing. It was taking like 20 minutes to do a cleanup on it, and then like his pencil slipped, and he was like, and it was like, he had the projector, and he was like, "So class, this is a lesson." He picked up the page, crinkled it, threw it in the trash. He's like, "I have to start over now because if I erase it, it's not going to be enough eraser to like." Because this is like still very early on computer stuff too, like
Oh,
scanning. So
wow.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
so like
yeah.
yeah, so my idea of cleanup was like, oh, cleanup is frightening and scary, and but um but yeah, Glenn, Derek, and John taught me how to ink and clean up um my
Oh,
characters, and like
yeah.
my hand is still shaky. I mean, now we can clean up. It's easy to clean up digitally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Because you have like kind of
also,
unlimited undos and like you have a lot of like tools helping you with like softwares and stuff.
yeah, because that's the other thing I always forget. Like, when I was on Titans, we had one iMac that we all shared, and we just basically used it to like lurk on animation forums and
Hmm.
laugh. It's very evil, but or also, I mean, laugh out of joy because like sometimes seeing like cool fan art is amazing. But we didn't have like we were all doing it on paper, so we were inking with microns, which is what I used to ink Harpy.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, anyway, yeah, that's how I got the Titans job. Like they hired me there, and then they basically trained me because they were having such a hard time finding anybody who understood like the style and the humor of the show. Like
Yeah.
people just weren't quite a fit, and I ended up sticking like like yeah, and I mean he passed away earlier this year, so I don't need to worry about embarrassing him. But like I remember when I first worked on Titans, Derek was like very antagonistic towards me. I think he was kind of like, I have to train this stupid person or whatever. But like he taught me a lot, and he ended up having me help out on some of his other shows, and I would just like I don't know, I just kind of understood how to turn his designs and stuff. So,
Mm.
but
Oh, that,
John is still yeah, and John is still working. He's still doing a lot of stuff at Warner's. Glenn's still around doing stuff too, and like Matt is out show running, and like yeah, it was a good
oh,
group.
yeah.
Like there wasn't a lot of women on there, but they were honestly really supportive, and like they even early on they even pulled me aside and were like, hey, this older animation person who had a show at Nick, we see that he's on your blog. Please stay away from him. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Do you feel
So,
like at the time when you went to CalArts there were like a lot of women at all in the classes, or do you feel like it was
oh,
mostly guys? Just asking because
you
I
know,
think it's like I feel like that
yeah,
translates into like, if you don't have a lot of like female students, then of course you're gonna have like less.
yeah. Actually, this ties into a conversation I had with Glenn Mirakami really early on Titans. So when I went to CalArts, we actually had a lot of students that were from South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was apparently, I think there might have been like a program between an animation school over there and CalArts. I'm not sure. I think Frank Terry might have had some sort of setup for that. But anyway, some of my classmates, and then also some of them went back to animate in Korea, and some of them had actually already animated, but there were some women that were from there too.
Oh, cool.
And some of them work here too. Like there's some that work as board artists here. Just, showing how small the world is.
Yeah.
And anyway, off the top of my head, um I always felt like there was a lot of women in our class, but there really wasn't. I think it was still like, I want to say maybe 10 or 20% of the students, the
Yeah.
CalArts, like overall, including just all 4 years together, like from the freshmen to the seniors. So
Yeah.
but I guess the class, my graduating class it was me, Tara Whitaker, Steph Choi, um, Heather Chavez, Josie Trinidad, and Valerie Fletcher, and I can't remember if Yo was in my class. I can't remember. I know there's a few more. Beth Slevin was in my class. Like that was it, sort of. And I apologize if there's like anyone else. Oh, Amanda Ridna. Amanda Ridna was in my class, I think.
Oh, really? So cool.
Yeah. I'm trying to think who else. Uh yeah. Anyway, there wasn't a lot. And then I remember when I was starting on Titans, and like we would hang out in Glenn's office a lot while he was going over design notes or whatever, and like just hanging out. And he had a computer in his office too. So like usually Derek or John or Ben Jones or somebody was like on the computer, like reading forum posts to us in funny voices. But I remember one day Glenn asking me, he's like, why aren't there more like women in animation? Like he's like, where are they? He's like, he was asking me, he's like, why, like you're one of the few that applied, or whatever. And then I was like, well, and at that point DeviantArt was a thing. Like I think I finally made a DeviantArt account around that time. And I told him like they're all in high school right now. He's like,
Yeah.
well, what do you
Yep.
mean? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm telling you, they have what I did not have. If I would have had that 5 years ago, I would be insane right now. But I told him like they're all on DeviantArt drawing Harry Potter things or fanfics, or that's because there was a pretty big fan base of like girls and like with like whatever, like um that were really into Titans, because the thing is like superheroes are still like they're dramas too.
Yeah.
They
Mm-hmm.
it's the characterization stuff, the meaty stuff. But I told him like they're all in high school, they're all drawing fan art, and I'm like they're finding each other. They have a supportive community now. Like
Yeah.
they like regard like you know I bet you a good chunk of those people are going to end up going to like animation school or like finding their own paths. Like I told them, give it 10 years. In 10 years this industry will be, at least I think the parody will be a lot better.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah, it was like
agree.
really funny. And then I think I was talking to him like a year or two ago, and he's like, how there's so many more people like working. I'm like, yeah, do you remember me telling you they were coming? Like it
Ah, ah,
like
ah,
winter is coming. I'm like, they will be here. All
ah,
the
ah.
all of them will be here. And yeah, I mean, we still have like a long ways to go in general, just with representation for general, like
Mm.
overall for the industry, but like we really have come pretty far.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. I think like things just like we just needed things to like democratize a little bit. I feel like probably like animation and just like that whole world in general was just kind of like a little bit like harder to get into because it wasn't just like I mean without going into a full like feminist rant, it's just like a very context based and like, for even for women to have jobs that were different from just like being a secretary or like like what were the other acceptable women job that was kind of like
well,
probably in the
yeah,
80s that like it
that
was like you could start doing something else then.
yeah, that was something my mom had mentioned to me a few times growing up, was that one of the reasons she was like supportive of like my art career was that she's like, oh, I would have loved to have like pursued something like this, but she's like, you know, I had to, she became a nurse instead. Like that was like more acceptable, and also like, she was going to school like in the 60s and 70s. So like, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Um, so it's interesting. And also the other thing too, like you don't like there's more information now on like there's like you can look up
Yes.
online like how lessons on like how to learn how to do this stuff, or there's communities to share your work, like your work in progress to like learn from. So that tuition barrier doesn't is less now, which I think is good. So it's like, you know,
Yes.
like if you don't, if your family can't afford it, doesn't necessarily isn't the only like there's I am hoping there's less roadblocks. Like I
I
said, like I'm
agree.
very aware how fortunate and how much like that plays into where I am now. Like I definitely have things that I'm using the wrong word because I think it's a little bit, my brain is just a little bit out for a weekend.
Yeah, it's
But
okay. It's okay. That makes a
yeah,
lot of
but
sense
I
though.
but
Um,
I think it's good. So we're seeing a lot more different types of stories and like, you know, the same sort of thing over and over again. So I know it's
yeah.
scary because the studios have been pulling a lot of stuff right now. And like honestly, I was expecting everything to rubber band back at some point because this is technically like my third time seeing the industry get disrupted. Because I also kind of dealt with that recession and the CN real time when Cartoon Network had a year where they were barely making any animation stuff.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's actually what forced me to jump into boards because I couldn't find design work because every show has more board jobs than they have design jobs.
Yes.
So like if Cartoon Network is like, oh, we're only doing two animated shows at a time now, like for a year, like, oh, that means there's only like maybe up to like four to six design jobs for that whole studio at that point. Like that's those are your number. It's a numbers game at that point. Like if you want to work in animation, like you know, boards, there's usually more positions open for that.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that because right now we're kind of a little bit in a weird time in animation, but hey, you're still here and you're doing great. So, you know, like anyone that's listening to this podcast right now, I know it's a scary time and you know, it's a little uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that you need to give up on this industry if it's your dream, you know, like you can just kind of like it's just hang in there, y'all.
yeah,
I do
yeah.
want to kind of before we run out of time, I do want to ask you a little bit about Amethyst and how did that work for you to pitch that? What was the opportunity like how did you find that opportunity? How did pitching go and how did running that short series go? Like what was that experience like in terms of like,
um
you know, leadership, occupying this position, you know what I mean?
yeah, overall the experience was like great and like oh you know it was a lot of work but it wasn't like difficult, but this is me saying it, like anybody who was working on it for with me or for me, like you know, hopefully they're okay and not, you know, it wasn't like a burnout thing. But yeah, like I will say with everything I've pitched, I don't feel like I've ever done um I don't even know if there is a traditional way to pitch shows, but I don't feel like I've ever had a traditional pitching experience. But basically, what happened was at the time I was working as a character designer on Mystery Scooby Doo Mystery Incorporated, and there was a it was internal. It was only I don't think they ever opened it up to anybody outside of Warner Brothers TV animation, but they basically did they were setting up a DC Nation block. They wanted to do shorts. They sent everybody, all the artists in the studio, a link to a website that had a list of all the B, C, and D characters of DC Comics. Like there was like a
Mm.
list. You had to pick a character off that list, and you could pick more than one, but
Oh,
you had to
cool.
put a pitch together for that. I can't remember if they had a list on how to pitch because like everyone I talked to did it differently. Um,
Oh,
but I,
interesting.
yeah, and at that point, I'd already had pitched Harpy around a little bit. Like Harpy actually was briefly in the Cartoon Institute for like a hot minute.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
And quick side question. How long ago did you start doing Harpy before you started pitching and before you did the Amethyst pitch? Was it like a
I
couple years
actually
in?
Harpy, I actually started drawing on Teen Titans.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a completely different thing, but my first year working on Titans, like the first couple months, I was just you know learning and collecting a paycheck. And then I was kind of just doing my own characters because on that show we would like draw on post-its and like trade them around all the
Mm-hmm.
time. Like we would just leave weird drawings on each other's desks. And I was kind of already drawing like this weird like elf character that lived in a mushroom. Because I was like, okay, well, I have this like nice computer setup now that I got from the nice Canadians. I really need to make a film. I also don't have a lot of time, but I need to figure out how to do it. And I remember one day, like Glenn was like stressed and like drawing over something, and he kind of asked me like, so what do you want to do? And he's like, you don't want to do what I do. You don't want to do this, put up with this, do you? And I was like, because like the stress and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was like, I don't know. I like making cartoons. I wouldn't be opposed to it or whatever. And then he was just, whatever, like chatting about that. And then him and Derek had made sketchbooks to sell at Comic-Con. And I think back then a lot of people were doing that. It was still pretty
Mm.
new. So he was like, you should put a sketchbook together and talk to Stuart Dean. Because Stuart carries a lot of art books from different animation artists.
Mm.
So I don't think I put any of Harpy in any of that because I think at the time I was like, I want to keep this close to my heart while I'm figuring out what to do with it.
Right.
But yeah, so I kind of was just messing around with Harpy on that. And then my next show I worked on was Class 3000, and I finished my assignments really early on that show. And maybe not all the time. It wasn't like, not bragging about it, but there was definitely on that show, like design wise, I would usually be done with my assignments by 4, and there usually wasn't enough to give me.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really dug into Harpy then and really like just played around. And it was pretty one note. It was basically just like 4 idiots that hang out in a fantasy town, running an ice shop. Because I think at that point there wasn't a lot of animated shows with girl leads, especially action adventure. And I really was like, I grew up on all the Final Fantasy games, like all the Super Nintendo Square
Yeah.
games. And I was like, this is what I want. This is what I want to watch. This is like I thought back like what would I want to watch when I was like 10 or 13? Like what TV show would I've gone nuts over? So I kind of was just like, yeah, there's this elf girl and she's just kind of she's a town nuisance, but she saves them from dragons and stuff. And so the
Mm.
characters like I mean they've gone through a lot of changes, but at their core they really haven't changed a whole lot. So I was drawing that a lot on 3000, and then I think I worked on Out of Jimmy's Head after that, and then that's when they went to see Unreal, and there wasn't enough animated shows to move on to. So I was taking a lot of animation tests for different studios. The only income I really had was doing freelance on Transformers Animated,
Hmm.
which, was a lot of the guys on that show just making sure I had income. And they also made me come in during lunch to watch Metabots and Arrested Development with them because they were like, we're concerned you're not getting social time, so come in,
That's
have
very
pizza
sweet.
with us. Yeah, it was very nice. I have good memories of animate working on animated. But anyway, during that time, somebody I knew that was higher up at Cartoon Network mentioned that they were starting a shorts program, and they're like, your name is on the list of people they want to see stuff from. So if you pitch, they will probably have a meeting with you.
Ah,
So
nice.
yeah. So I mean, nice on that friend to give me a heads up. So I was like, well, I don't really have anything, super ready, but I'm like, I have this. So it forced me to make like a pitch document for Harpy, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I ended up taking it in, and I met with Robert Zetti and Craig McCracken because they were still in charge of it at that point.
Oh, very cool.
Eventually,
Yeah.
yeah, eventually they left, and then Sorter took it over, and then I think he wanted a different direction for the shorts. So Harpy died really fast. Like Harpy only lasted like a week. So,
Okay, yeah,
um,
because you said that was over at Disney, right?
well,
Or
I took it to Disney later, and then Disney was really like
yeah.
really really weird with it, and honestly, um,
Oh no, you
like
mean
looking back at it and my different experiences since, like all I'm gonna say is I think they were kind of unprofessional with how they handled stuff.
mm.
Um, just
But
yeah,
Robin
that's just
Craig was at no wait, that was a Cartoon Network.
yeah. Rob and
Robin
Craig were
Craig,
at
yeah.
Cartoon Network
Mm-hmm.
because I think they were finishing up Foster's, maybe I don't know, but
Mm.
yeah, like they liked it. They gave me some really constructive notes, like things I didn't, like it was like now it's like a very basic list of like really knowing who your characters are, what their wants and needs are, and like how they interact, like
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
working, yeah, and then working when I worked for Glenn, when I worked on the Titans, he told me like when he was developing the Titans characters, he basically made like a document that was like how the characters interact when they're only like two on two, how they act together, like what their pros and cons are.
Mm-hmm.
So like an example, like using my comic characters, like Harpy to Opal, well, they're best friends. Okay, and like Opal's like super supportive. That's great, but she's also so supportive that Harpy gets hurt because Opal thinks Harpy's like you know indestructible, and she's not. So
Mm,
it's like almost gets to a point where it could be toxic friendship. So that's just an
right.
example, like how you can write your characters. But anyway, yeah. So Rob Renzetti gave me. I still have the email somewhere. I think because that was back when I used to print out emails because we were still like, kind of getting into email more. But it gave me a really constructive feedback, and they did greenlight me to at least make a storyboard. And because I had no money coming in, instead of giving a board artist that money, I was like, I need that money so bad. I need the board. So I borrowed my friend's Wacom tablet because at that point I had never really drawn digitally.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, I'd only done stuff on paper. I had a scanner, but she let me borrow her Wacom tablet, and I had a copy of Photoshop, and I basically did a really really crude board to that, and then dropped it in Premiere, and then timed it. Like I didn't record my voice because I didn't have a microphone at the time, but I timed it out. So I made sure that like when I was, in Premiere that I could voice everything. And then I pitched it to Sorcher and some people. I didn't realize at the time that it was like an open pitch. Like I thought everyone in the room was like, "Oh, these are like execs or something." Um, but I did a live pitch to the animatic, and after that they I guess they said that this came up from above. This isn't from the guy, this isn't from Craig or Rob. They said they were interested in putting Harpy into development if I made Ash the lead character because they were not doing girl
Mm,
leads at the studio.
at the
And
time, yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely at that time. So I kind of was like not sure about it. I think I talked to Lauren Faust a little bit at that point because I think Craig brought the Bible home for Harpy, and then she messaged me and said that if it went forward, if she could like write a script, like she really liked it. So she was very supportive
Oh,
of it.
that's so sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really sweet. For something that was very much like still like
Up in
weird
the air,
fetus.
yeah.
Yeah, weird, squishy, not, figured out. Um, but I remember mentioning like, oh, like, maybe I should just do it. Like it's a foot in the door or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think like all the people that were kind of pushing for Harpy left Cartoon Network within like a week or two after my pitch.
Ah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens. That does happen.
Yeah. So that was like baby's first like, oh, this is the real world. And then I think I was still out of work, and I remember being like kind of like, well, I'll show them, and then I went and like was like I was playing like a lot of DDR on the
Uh-huh.
Wii at the time.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
had this one song I was obsessed with. I was like, I'm gonna make a music video. And YouTube was still fairly, I mean, YouTube was like a few years old at that point. So I was like, I'm gonna make a film and have it online. It'll take them 2 years to get one of those shorts done, and they bet they won't even put them online. And so
Mm-hmm.
I made a flash animated film called Love Shine that's like really janky, put it online, like did it in 2 weeks, which I would not recommend. Like I I was having vision problems. Like I was like, everything's wiggly. Like, do not do that.
Ah, ah.
But I put it online, went home for Christmas, and it got shared around like different animation people. And then I think I was doing a little bit of freelance on the Ben 10 that Glenn was running, and I went to drop that off. And him and Dwayne McDuffie was in like because he was like the head writer. They were
Mm-hmm.
watching the film and they were like laughing, like they thought it was really funny. And then they kind of mentioned that they're like, hey, even though like a lot of people were out of work and struggling, um, like a lot of like comedy shows weren't being made. So there was a lot of comedy people looking for work, but apparently some of the action shows over at Warner's were having a hard time finding experienced action board artists. There was like,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, there was a
Mm-hmm.
shortage. So Glenn and Dwayne were like, oh, they need board artists over on Brave and the Bold. Like Glenn was like, Michael Chang
Mm-hmm.
needs a board artist. Like, why don't you just message him? And he was one of our directors on Titans.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in, uh the director, who ended up being my director on Brave and the Bold, like he watched Michael Chang watched Love Shine, was like, okay, well, you understand shot direction. He's like, we'll just train you as you go. And my boards on Brave and the Bold were like really bad. And then my board partner was like LaShawn Thomas, and he was
Oh
honestly like
yeah.
pretty supportive. Um, like I was able to kind of get through that run because of him and Mike.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot, but then I jumped back to design after that. And the industry was kind of like repairing itself at that point. There was a lot more work. So went on to that, went to do designs on Avengers, I think. Yeah, I was on Avengers Mightiest Heroes with Tom Perkins. Then I went back to Warner's to work on Mystery Incorporated. So that's when all the DC Nation stuff started.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I went on this long journey.
No, that's cool. It was
Yeah,
interesting to hear like that the little bit of the story of Harpy. I think this is so interesting because it shows how long and winded a pitching process can be. So
yes,
now this is really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
I always like it. I mean, it's still like awful and it's still hard. But whenever I have mutuals that have amazing shorts or pilots that like, yes, they should be. These should be series. They could totally be series. And like I have friends who have pilots that did amazingly well online, and then like the studios don't pick them up for whatever reason. And I
Yeah.
always tell them, like, honestly, like, you do not know what the future will hold. Like, my
Yeah.
best advice is to go ahead and keep making stuff. Like make stuff because you want
Yes.
to make stuff too. Like don't do it just for
Yes.
that golden carrot they're gonna dangle.
Yes.
But you'll make other things that you'll love, and then you never know when that other stuff will come back. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's yeah. So yeah, so on the DC Nation list, there was a bunch of characters, and it was Amethyst, Bumblebee, and Wonder Girl were the ones I picked.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I had a pitch for Bumblebee, and I had a pitch put together for Amethyst. I could not really get the one for Wonder Girl to work. I really wanted to do one about her and her cat.
Oh,
I think
cute.
Kiki. I can't remember her cat's name. I actually really love Wonder Girl as like a character, like personality wise, she's really fun. So, but yeah, so Amethyst, I actually didn't know much about Amethyst, and I did research and was just like, how how has DC done like nothing with this character? It has everything. It checks all my boxes, like
Mm-hmm.
fantasy, like very fantasy themed, like weird girl forced into like magical setting, like swords, fighting. She has a cool dog. She has a Pegasus. There is a dumbass with like a weird robot sled thing that he rides around. Like the villain's really silly. I mean, he's scary, but he's like really funny to me. So I got really into it, and I basically kind of looked through my Harpy pitch, was just like, what are elements from Harpy that aren't exclusive to Harpy that I can like put into Amethyst.
Mm-hmm.
So and it, like so I basically structured it as like, I was like, well, they're probably only going to pick up one short, but I'm going to structure it as like a 7-part series of shorts, but also if they want to do one short, it can work as a standalone. So
Right.
I did one quick, like, really shitty drawing of for representing every short, and then I think I did and then I had like like one or two sentences underneath each one, which what was happening, and then I think I had one other page that was like about the main character and about some of the characters she was going to run into, and then that was all I turned in. And Bumblebee was only one sheet, I think. I did one drawing, was like, and then I wrote like the story out, which was like, it was basically going to be Bumblebee versus Poison Ivy, because like Bumblebee, somebody like alerts her like, oh, the bees are missing. Because I think that was around the time when everyone's like, in real life, like something's happening to the bee population.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah,
That was
yeah.
like 2011, I think, at that point, or
Right.
2010, I can't remember. And so I had it where like Bumblebee goes to investigate the bees, and she has like a big, like, cool spy fuzzy coat, so
Mm-hmm.
like super spy girl, and like she goes to investigate a hive where like the bees are missing, and then she realizes that there's like vines and stuff. And you find out that Poison Ivy's like kidnapped all the bees to give her plants a spa day. So it's like a big fight between. It was basically an excuse to have Bumblebee versus Poison Ivy. That's all I cared about. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, so I got a phone call on my work from Ben Jones because he was one of the people that was in charge of choosing which shorts went.
Right.
Um, so he got a call. He's like, "Hey, Brianne, so I have good news and bad news about Amethyst." I'm like, "Oh, well, give me the bad news first." And he's like, "Well, I can't really give you the bad news unless I give you the good news."
Ah, ah.
So he's like, "What's the good news?" He's like, "Oh, good news is we want to do the Amethyst. We want to make an Amethyst short." I'm like, "Oh, great. What's the bad news?" He's like, "We want to make all seven of them."
Ah.
So I think I might have been one of the few people who pitched the short, pitched a character short that was like multi
That's
whatever.
interesting. That's really cool.
Yeah. So, and I heard that like some people internally pitched characters that weren't on the list. So like we can't do those because like DC's not going to let us do the A-list characters. Like it's just it was really early on.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I had to go in and meet with Ben, and the exec I met with was Jeff Prezenkowski, who I don't know where he's. I think he's writing now. But I went in and I had my Amethyst document, but I also brought. I have a binder of all my Harpy art, so I brought that in and was like, "Hey, if any of this isn't working for you, here's a whole binder of fantasy stuff I have." Um, so I think the only thing from Harpy that kind of carried over into Amethyst and like this is going to be a big spoiler for readers, but if you've listened this long I feel like you deserve it. So in Amethyst there's a frog village, and they're more like, there's they're more humanoid and they're kind of mixed with like different monster parts, but there's a frog village, and if we had gone to series, the frog village would have still been her home base. Like there was going to be frog characters, and
Oh.
because I really wanted her kind of living with the monsters because those are the people she would be protecting in Gemworld.
Mm.
Or not, like that's all that's left of her kingdom. Basically, the frogs are all that's left of her kingdom. There's no, all the humans are dead. So,
Mm.
so she's defending them from Dark Opal basically, and none of the other kingdoms, um, obviously want to jump in because they don't want to defend a bunch of frogs. So she basically
Mhm.
has to go around and like convince the other kingdoms that like even the people you think are lowest are definitely worth your time. So,
Mhm.
but anyway, the frogs actually come from the original Harpy pitch I took to Cartoon Network and other places. So I'm not going to say much except the chapter I'm currently working on. The frogs. The frogs are going to be really big this chapter. Like yeah.
The time of the
So
frogs, everyone. That's the
yeah.
time.
So yeah, like I know I have a few readers that keep track of things in the background and things, and like it's been set up since the first chapter. There's a frog in the dungeon when
Ah, that's so sweet.
when Wolf goes to unlock Harpy from her detention in the dungeon. Uh, there's a
Ah.
frog in the panels, and that's always meant to be. So it's taken 9 years, and now the frogs are here. So, and the frogs are like a very basic fantasy trope. So, like, I know there's going to be comparisons to like, a really good show that just recently ended about frogs, but I think it's still like its own thing. So I'm not going to worry about it and just go for it.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like the two cakes problem. Like, oh, you like this cake? Here's another cake. This one
Mhm.
has extra cherries on top or something. I don't know.
Yeah, 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 totally. Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, sorry, I went on that huge tangent, but yeah, so that's how I pitched Amethyst, and we went, and then I had an outline already, and then I worked with Amy Rolfram to like help flesh out the script, and she was also one of the writers who worked on Teen Titans, and one of the writers I would get to talk to when I worked on that show years ago. Um, that was everything too. I love shows where like artists and writers can interact. Like I'm so glad my
Yeah.
first TV experience was that, because and everyone is doing great, but like I still chat with them every once in a while. Like even Dave Slacks, sometimes like we talk on Twitter once in a while, and like he's doing really well, I hope, and stuff. But yeah, so it was really cool to work with Amy on this because we're both
Hmm.
like, yeah, we get to make fancy girl thing, and also like not too long after the news broke that we were going to make the Amethyst shorts, like there was a room in one of the buildings at Warner's. Like they had, I think it was one of the first years they were having actual storyboard revisionists at Warner's. I don't think we ever had revisionists before. It was always just the board artists handling stuff.
Mm.
And we're all like friends, but there was like there's a room full of like um, you know, like like different like women and other people in that one room, and like after like Amethyst got picked up, like they were all in my cube and like, can we work on it? Because I think
Oh,
we were also like thirsty to finally. I even had like fellow dudes that I worked with off and on for years that were like, can I please work on Magical Girl Show? Like I am so tired of this like sausage party business I'm always having to
oh,
draw. Nothing against, sausage parties, but like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, it was like so funny. Like there was like so many guys are like, they're like, I want to work on this because like my daughter will like it, like it was just
That
in
is
general, like
so
people were just,
sweet.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was just that it was like, oh, it's not Batman. Can we help on it? And
Yeah.
so I did my best to try to include like the people in the studio that I knew like would really like a chance to work on it. And then I kind of prefaced it with like, hey, I'm aware if you're working on this, it's freelance, it's going to be after hours. I really don't want people to like be burnt out or whatever. And like, I know I'm aware that this is extra for you. And I told them like, if you
Mm.
have any questions, if there's something in the outline that isn't working, or if you're struggling figuring out how to like board this, like just let me and then one of my other friends, Chrissy Delk, who she boarded two of the shorts, I think. I'm
Mm.
blanking right now because it's been so long. And she's a really, really talented board artist. I kind of was like, oh, just come to one of us if you have any questions. We'll just meet up for coffee. Like, there's no shame. Like, there is no
Yeah.
like, I do not want you to feel like your neck's on the line or anything. Like, this is us just working on a project together. So, and then
I I think it's crazy that like you were making those basically all freelance. Like that it wasn't like you didn't have like a little in-house team. It
I
sounds like it
can't,
was
honestly, it's been so long. I can't remember exactly how it was paid out. It might have been freelance or it might have been just overtime. I honestly can't remember. I don't want to speak for Warner
right.
Production.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I
Um,
was thinking more like I thought like it would have been because it is like seven shorts, right? So I thought it would have been kind of like, oh, here's a little team
oh,
and they're going to be working for like, I don't know, X amount of month. But it sounds like it
yeah,
was more like a little bit more of a almost like an
all the
indie
short.
production
Yeah,
almost.
and I think all the shorts, most of the shorts were run that way. They were all mostly
Mm.
like, people doing stuff on the outside. But like, so yeah, so we had that talk, and then I boarded the first short just to kind of like give everyone a jumping off point because like I
Hmm.
I don't think my boards for the first short were good at all, and but I haven't boarded a whole lot, and I think that was back when I was still boarding on post-its. I didn't know Storyboard Pro yet. Storyboard Pro was
Mm.
still fairly new at that point too, like
Mm.
overall. So I boarded it on paper or whatever, and then I went and made a chart to show like what the progression was, like which character should be in each short. Like Amethyst, her locket changes throughout the short just to stay consistent. Or I would do a sketch of like a map layout for what the background needed to be or where the character needed to be, and then I would do maybe a couple of like acting thumbs for some of the shorts, and then hand those to the board artists. And then like looking like back then, I didn't realize that that's actually what you're supposed to be doing as a director, but
Mm-hmm.
like it does feel kind of weird knowing that like I had those like basics for that long, but I've only
Mm-hmm.
been directing like full time for like last couple of years. So it took a long time to convince people that I could do it even after that. So um
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I feel like
yeah.
that's
So
kind of yeah, it's kind of tough. Also, like just a random question, but do you have an agent?
I don't. I've been using an entertainment lawyer. I actually got in contact with her with Amethyst, and like I don't want to get into like the bad part of that. Like she's been
Yeah.
great.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
kind of took me on. She actually kind of took me on as a charity case because I was in a really not great situation,
Mm, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
financially, and like um yeah, like I don't think I can legally talk about like that, the
Yeah,
way
yeah.
some of that stuff was set up. But it
I was
wasn't
just
good, and
I was
she
just gonna mostly like kind of like mention that like for me, I think before I had an agent, I really wanted to be an episode director, and it was really, really hard to land that job. I feel like it's so I'm not surprised when you say that it took so long for you to manage to get the episode director title because
yeah.
there's not that many jobs for it. And it's like, yeah, it's yeah, it's tough.
Yeah,
It's
no,
yeah.
you're right. And like one of the things I ran into for a few years after that, um, was I would go in for interviews for things and they wouldn't believe me when I said I directed Amethyst, even though I had IMDb credit for it.
Interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, they were like, "Well, that was so and so, wasn't it?" And I'm like, "No, they did not do that." But okay, it was very like,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
this is like nothing against like the people or crew or the people they got to make it, but I did actually interview for Shira early on, and that was one of the times where like, "But you didn't work on Amethyst." And
Oh
I
yeah.
actually
Hmm.
even pulled up my portfolio website and I was like, I don't know how else to prove this to you, but okay. Like, so
Hmm.
I mean, it was kind of like, I mean, that was kind of like really kind of sad because I was like, well, I already made this thing, but okay. Um,
Hmm.
anyway, to go back to like the other stuff, but I was recently talking to an agency and I actually would like to sign with them, but I think I'm in a position right now that I can't really afford to do it.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and it's nothing against that agency. And like my entertainment lawyer has actually been really great. Because I pay her by hour. And I think the other thing a lot of people don't talk about is when you're pitching, it's expensive. You're
Yes.
basically buying a ticket for the lottery and you need to pay, and you're also paying for what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Like
Yep. Hmm.
like with Harpy, like luckily I had support on the exec side to retain my publishing rights. But that was kind of like a battle too with like Nick Legal. And I had to pay like a few months worth. Like it I yeah. But the thing was is that's for my own sense of security and mental health too, a little bit.
Hmm.
Because like not to be like super pessimistic or negative, even though there was a lot of support at Nick early on for Harpy and people really wanted it, in my heart, I was like, there's no way this is going to series, especially at the studio. And I know a lot of people are like, well, why don't you pitch it over here? And like, I think the thing most people don't know is Nick is the last place that asked for it. It was the only place I hadn't pitched it to.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So I was kind of like, if this is going to be animated, this is probably going to be the only chance, unless me
Mm.
doing it outside, which I don't really have the time or the money to pay people what they're worth to animate this. Like, I don't
Right.
think an indie production road is appropriate for me because I've been entrenched in normal productions, or not normal, but television production for so long that like
Yeah, it's
I just
hard to,
know
yeah.
yeah, I understand like what the workload can do on somebody in their body and I want to make sure that they're like, they get paid for it and they have some sort of health insurance for it. Like I'm okay using the studios to for that end in that way, I guess. Like
Right.
um but
That's
yeah, I made sure early I wanted to be able to go into development with Harpy without having to worry about what would happen to the comic.
oh
So
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
so that way I was able to put my full self into just making the best short I could. And that was my whole goal was like my whole goal is like just to make the short like try to have the short be like in the heart of the comic and have it online so I can at least share it with like the people who read the comic who've been supporting it for so long. And
Yeah, yeah. That's
yeah.
for real. That's great. So Brianna, I want to ask you a couple of questions from our patrons over on the Discord. I have one from Pretty Pants. The question is, I really love just how clean your line quality and anatomy is. What do you think helps you learn the best to get better at character design, storyboarding, respectively? How much did you practice,
Oh.
specific time spent, etc.?
Mm. Uh, I will, I don't think what I'm going to say is going to be any different than what most people say. I mean, definitely practice is like, try to set some time aside when you can to draw, even if it's not every day, just even throughout the week.
Mm.
Figure drawing, like I know figure drawing is kind of like a weird, can or feels like it might be boring, but observing from life, drawing, figure drawing or whatever, you know, I would prefer drawing from classes because I always kind of feel bad drawing people I see out on the street, like in coffee shops. But I don't think there's anything
Mhm.
bad about it. I personally, I always feel kind of like, but sometimes I'll do it. Um, just watch a lot of things outside of animation. Like and this is something I'm personally bad about because I don't have a lot of free time because I watch a lot of anime lately. Um, but like watching like nature documentaries, like animals, like that's a great place to get character design and color reference. Like, I like to look at sea creatures a lot for color. Um,
Mhm. Would you say that starting on paper helped you with your line quality? Would you say that like drawing with the micron and stuff is something that factored in
I,
versus digital?
yeah, I don't really draw with a micron. I just ink. I usually just draw with pencil. I usually just draw with number two pencil. Sometimes I draw with like mechanical. I switch out my art supplies if I'm having trouble sometimes. Like that sometimes helps and breaks me out of it.
Mhm.
Or when I'm coloring, I set aside like a limited palette and I'm like, I'm just going to color with these, and it forces me to try different color combinations. Um, I also don't want to put down digital. I draw on paper because that's where I started out on, and that's usually my comfort spot. And that's actually why I draw my comic on paper because, we work on digital all day for work.
Yes, yes.
Um, and also working as a director, like I still draw as a director, but I don't draw quite as much. And it's been harder to find free time to draw. So it's like, it's kind of tricky to like uh even to find time to draw my comic like that. Like during 2020, that was one reason I had to put my comic on hold a lot because was
Right.
my workload was just so high. Um, I will say too, though, if you work as like a board artist, if you ever end up in that sort of position, you end up drawing so much that like it actually affected with how I draw my designs, and I actually saw some improvement in
Oh
my
yeah.
personal work.
I
Yeah,
agree. I feel like as someone who's like done boards, I did a little character design, but that's so minor compared to the amount of boards that I did, and I feel like boards you have to be so fast and you have to learn so many other designs from other because you don't often get to draw in your style. You often have to be a chameleon, like you said. I think it
yeah,
does like teach you as an artist so much new design tricks like shorthands and stuff. Yeah, boards is definitely really like an interesting craft to get kind of better at and faster at drawing. I kind of wanted to also ask, this one's a quick question from another one of our patrons on Discord. Brother to drummer question is, did you ever have any non-art day jobs? If so, what were they?
oh well, yeah, I guess sort of. I feel like such a jerk. So I've worked on my dad's farm, but
Oh,
I
very
wasn't really
cool.
but I mean I wasn't really technically paid for it, but I've tossed potatoes. I've had to toss potatoes off of like the conveyor belt when they were taking them from the storage and to take them to a truck to like, take them to wherever they're being sold to. So
That's so
when
cool. And
the
that's
yeah,
your
I went and
username too.
yeah, so when the potatoes come out of storage, like some of them of course are not, sellable. They're
Mhm.
disgusting. So it was like me and my cousins with gloves on, and we were just chucking potatoes for like 8 hours a day. And that's like the only time I've ever had arm muscles in my life. And that part was really cool. Um, I mean, I guess I was just talking about like industries in general, like animation being tough. Like my, the summer before I went to Cal Arts, was really bad for farmers. Like I mean, I'm still like pupa brain, so I can't remember exactly what was going on. I just know that nobody was buying large russet potatoes. They were only buying restaurant fingerling potatoes. So we
Mm.
had to toss out anything that was over a certain size, which was awful. So
Whoa. That's
yeah, and
crazy.
I think we came pretty close to like losing the farm that year. Like things are fine now. I mean, even with everything going on, I think overall everything's okay. But
Mhm.
which also ties into like me earlier talking about like taking CalArts super seriously, my parents paying me through it, was that I was aware of our financial situation, so I didn't really want to, waste that time. Anyway,
Yeah.
yes, I tossed potatoes, and then this is still an art related job, but when I was in grade school, we had a local lady that taught pottery classes. She had a kiln and everything set up. So I mean, I haven't thrown pottery in years. I'd be learning from scratch again. But when I was in high school, she had me take over her class for one summer, and I think that was also my senior year too.
Mm.
So I was teaching little kids how to throw pottery, and sometimes
That's
people wouldn't pick up their kids, so I would just be babysitting someone's kid for like an hour, which The kid was really cool, so it was fine. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, totally. I think I have like a last question that I really like. One of them, I'm just going to give a shout out from at Vect on Twitter. They asked if your journey as a character designer, creative director, and animation industry was rough. I think we kind of went over that, but I thought that was a cool question.
yeah.
And another one from at Dimps Doodles. What's some tips you'd give to a new webcomic creator? I've always had ideas, but but commitment is scary. I think this is a great question. And if you have like
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
tips for that.
Okay, I guess the one tip I have, or the most important one, is the hardest part is starting and putting
Yes.
yourself out there and online. That is the hardest part.
Yes.
Um, when I started Harpy as a webcomic, uh, I was I was in like a very not great mental place. I actually didn't work in the industry for almost a year after, because I didn't let anybody know I was available, and I also didn't apply. I was actually like trying to figure out if I should leave the industry or not. And then ended up working, like I ended up finding like a design job again. But I had I have a group of friends that were running Dumb Comics, and it was towards the end of Dumb Comics life, but they had every 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 comic has its own day for uploading on the way that site was built. So Monday was open. So they asked me if I wanted to update a comic. And I was at the time like, I don't know. I don't think I have anything. And then I had Katie Rice sent me a really, really nice email that was basically like, I think it's time for you to put Harpy out there. Like I
Oh
can't I
yeah.
need to I need to read it so I can paraphrase it. But she basically was like, it's time for Harpy to be out there. Like, we want to read it or whatever. So um
Oh,
so I
because you
ended
were
up,
drawing it, but you weren't publishing it anywhere.
and I wasn't even drawing Harpy at that point. Like
Mm.
I after Amethyst got picked up, I just totally dropped Harpy like a I hadn't drawn those characters. I hadn't even thought about them. Like I was just like, nobody wants Harpy. I already know that. Like I've already
Mm.
been told that. So I like this dog you're drawing.
Thank you.
He's so cute. I My computer has some lag. I think that's why I'm having some issues. But anyway, um so I took what I had for Harpy so far, which was very basic, and was like, okay, I don't know where the story is going yet. I just need to get all the characters to meet each other. So I was like, okay, where do I want them to meet at? So I would say with webcomics, take baby steps. You don't have to have the full thing figured out. Also, keep your stories small. Like I think
Yes.
mine's like a weird I don't want anyone to use mine as like an example, because I'm like one of the one of the rules that they say do not do, which is tell a huge overarching story as your first comic.
Yes.
Mine
Yes.
mine just mutated into that. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Hmm.
But overall, I think that's really good advice to start small. So with Harpy, I was like, I just need to get the characters to an item shop. So I basically structured my goals that way. I was like, what do I need to have happen this month or whatever? So I was like, okay, introduction to the character. So I have Harpy by herself. Why does she need to go to the item shop? Well, maybe her sword is busted. So it turned into that. But the thing was, is as I was working on the webcomic and writing it, and I already had a lot of stuff because I've been working with the characters for years. I started being able to connect all the pieces I already had. And by the time, for those that are familiar with the comic, by the time that the characters make it to Humphrey's party, I already knew what the end of my comic was. I already knew what the trajectory was. I already knew what the chapters were going to be, and I was working off of an outline. This is the first chapter I'm
Oh,
working off of a script.
nice.
And I think most
Wow.
webcomic people work off of outlines, and I think that's totally normal and fine, because the thing with webcomics versus other comics is we have the advantage to change things on a dime or
Yes. Hmm.
adjust if something, we're like, this isn't quite working, and they're like, oh, I finally have a solve for this, and then you can fix it right away,
Yep.
which is honestly the exciting part of webcomics for me.
I agree.
So
Totally. I
yeah.
feel that in my bones. That's something I've done a bunch with Rodney where I'm like, I'm starting this chapter. I know I need something to happen here. I don't know how I'm going to solve it. Sometimes it's kind of soul crushing because you're like, oh, I really painted myself into a corner here. But but sometimes it's kind of nice when you're like, just walking around doing your groceries or whatever, and you're like, oh
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
that's what I need there. Like
And
that's what needs to happen. Yeah.
it can easily turn into like an obsession. And I'm so
Oh
lucky
yeah.
that I have some close friends that are not online much at all that I see all the time. They're actually my real like my really in-person friend group. And they've had to deal with my webcomic bullshit for years, and they still are supportive even though I can tell I annoy them. And like they're like one of the few people that actually know the whole trajectory of the story. And like I will bounce stuff off for them once in a while. I'm like, does this make sense? You know? And then
Mhm.
a couple of them actually keep up with it too. Like I do not expect my close friends to read it. Like definitely do not.
I think this was so fun, and I love that like we got to talk about the webcomic, that we talked about your career and all of the crazy moments in animation. So, is there anything you want to plug before I wrap this up?
Um, yeah, wait, give me a second.
Yep.
Is my audio still okay? Because I'm just talking to the computer now.
It's still okay. This is your the parting voice.
Okay. I guess I don't know. I guess like you can read my webcomic at harpg.com, and also like there's some other animation people, not just I mean, obviously read V's awesome comic. Um,
Ah,
but
thanks.
there's some other animation people who have webcomics hosted on hiveworks.com. I think it might
Hi.
be the Hiveworks, but if you look up Hiveworks, check the link that has the cute round bee, and there's more webcomics that update every week. So like, yeah, enjoy webcomics. Be free from animation shackles.
So true. I think having a personal project is like really liberating and really helps when going through like difficult moments like the one that we're going through in animation right now.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the end of this creative block. Brianne, thank you so much for being our guest and sharing your story. And thanks to your listeners. Follow us on Twitter. It's at Creative Block, creative without the vowels, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask our guests. Huge thanks to editor Clemens for editing the podcast and Malik for helping us produce the show. If you love our show, then support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you early access to interviews as well as bonus episodes. You also get to ask prompts early, and so make sure that you join the Discord. It's really fun. I have been your host, V. Keep being creative, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.